Ladies and gentlemen, now today it's time for the December update to everybody's favourite slightly controversial Google spreadsheet. And in today's update, we're going to be talking about the introduction of Immortal Hulk and Abomination, and also the revamped version of Daredevil. Now, in today's video as well, we're not going to be talking about Spider-Ham, just because he's a very different character. I'm not quite sure where he fits on the tier list. I'm pretty sure it's somewhere between God tier and beyond God tier, but the more testing I do, man, the more crazy the character is. And on top of Spider-Ham as well, he has some really good synergies, which are going to upgrade the value of all sorts of characters. So yeah, I need to do a lot of testing when it comes to him and his synergies, and all of that stuff is going to be out in videos this month, and then I'll update it on the tier list when it comes to the start of January. Now, before we start today's update as well, I want to throw out the standard tier list disclaimer that this is a rough guide to what I personally believe are some of the best and most valuable champions on a comparative spectrum. And it's just my opinion based off my experience at the end of the day. So if you want to have a different opinion, that's fine, but the game is incredibly complicated. There are almost 200 characters, there are so many different matchups, modes of gameplay, and also nodes, all which alter the performance of characters. So yeah, the game is very big and very complicated, so use this for what it is, a rough guide to what I personally believe are some of the best champions. And again, when it comes to upgrading your own characters, be sure to do a little bit of research. Now, in November, we had the introduction of two very highly anticipated champions, the Immortal version of Hulk and Abomination. Now, Hulk was definitely a subject of discussion last month, and he's going straight into the high demigod tier, and I think this might be a bit of a generous placement, but I feel like he just about fits here. You could make the argument that he maybe belongs a little bit lower, because this character does have a lot of cons, but when stuff does go right with him, and if you've got high skill and you're very good at playing, you can make this guy work in some scenarios and matches. And again, when stuff does go to plan, he can be very satisfying to play. However, let's talk about the pros and cons. So he's poison immune, he has immortality with a 50-second cooldown, but this unlike other immortality mechanics like Hella's, for example, this one is used as part of his damage rotation, so it's not really a safety net mechanic for the character. And also, if you're playing against a very aggressive AI and you get the right stun RNG with a special 2 into special 1 combo, you can deal some massive burst damage. And if you pull it off and RNG lines up and you get the procs you want to get, the damage is quite nice off this dude. There's a lot of burst potential there. And also his animations and special moves are really cool, and he does feel great to play. However, the cons, all of the big damage he deals to the opponent, he deals back to himself. This means if you're playing this guy right and you're being very aggressive and getting those big damage numbers, you're playing the majority of the fight on 1 hit point, which means that it's very difficult to play aggressively and keep up his damage rotation there. And there's kind of a lot of dead space with his immortality where you have absolutely no safety net. So you can't rely on parry or block. You know, you need to intercept perfectly and find those opportunities to punish the opponent. And again, in certain matchups and scenarios, this can work out, but if there's any source of external damage like degeneration or any sort of damage over time or damage back, then this guy is just gonna die. So he really doesn't have like much immortality or survivability. He's a very vulnerable champion that you literally need to play on 1 hit point for the majority of the fight once you get into it. He's like a much higher risk version of Nick Fury or Thing with like less overall payoff in terms of the damage. So, you know, he's a very weird character in that regard. He also has low block proficiency, tons of chip damage taken, and as kind of I mentioned as well, there are probably about 30 to 50 characters moving up on the tier list that can deal similar or better damage that don't need to play on 1 health, that also have a lot more utility and a lot more stuff that they bring to the table. So overall, Immortal Hulk, you know, he's a bit of a fun time in the right matchup and scenario, but I think Just overall, there are just much better characters in the game across all sorts of classes, especially in the science class as well. There are loads of really good champions that bring so much more damage, utility, and use to the table. So yeah, Immortal Hulk, at least in my opinion, is a little bit of a flop. He does have a nice benefit from suicide masteries because he stores any of the recall damage taken as gamma radiation, so technically he does heal some of that back. But this character, again, if you do want to get the most out of him, you need to be a really skilled player in order to do so. So yeah, I think High Demigod is probably the appropriate ranking for this character release, but again, this one is subject to evaluation. So that brings us to the second of the November champions, Immortal Abomination, and I think out of the two, man, he's a fair bit better. This guy has potential as well for a solid god tier promotion at some point in the future, but I'm very curious to see how he does perform when it comes to the release of Act 7. So to go over some of the pros of Immortal Abomination, he's got some really solid damage output. After the first special 2 and you activate Toxic Aura, you just get so many poisons on the opponent, also so much acid burn as well, which allows you to nuke in and be unblockable, and that's really fun. He's a character very much like Aegon, once he's ramped up, that you can play very aggressively and just find all sorts of ins and opportunities there. So yeah, I love that about him, man. Really enjoyable character to play. He also takes no damage from poison and uses any additional poison on him or his opponent to further boost up his damage output. So if there's any scenario that involves, again, poison on him applying more poisons to the opponent, he's just going to be even better there. He also has lots of debuffs as well. There's so much poison, there's a petrify, there's all sorts of stuff firing off. So this makes him really good for distract nodes and any node or scenario where applying lots of debuffs is needed, or greatly boost damage output. So for example, the Cavalier event quest, you got the science node, you need to apply lots of debuffs to get Fury. So yeah, really interesting for certain fights in that as well. He's also a very good healing counter, again, with all the debuffs as well, and also the ability to apply Petrify on the special one can also reverse healing on top of that. So yeah, he's just great for nuking down kind of big healing opponents. And yeah, just has pretty high uptime on the unblockable. So yeah, that's pretty much it when it comes to him. Like, he's a high damage output character, lots of poison, lots of debuffs, can play very aggressively, but the cons also link into his pros as well. So you need one special 2 in order to get the damage going, but also if you can't poison the opponent, this character is terrible. So he's a specialist character, works very well when you can poison the opponent, but if you can't poison the opponent, you just don't want to bring Abomination. But the good news is he's pretty good by himself. He doesn't really need any particular synergy, although the Red Skull one is very nice to have for this character to be really good. But yeah, I think he's just a really good addition to a lot of questing teams depending on the matchups and paths. And the thing is, with poison immunity, a lot of the older characters do have it, especially in the science and cosmic class, but a lot of the champions, especially the really annoying ones that have been added in like the last 2 and a bit years, don't have poison immunity. And also one pro that he really has as well is whenever you block an attack, you also apply a small weakness debuff to the opponent, minus 30% attack, but you apply these in quick succession as well. So blocking stuff like what is it, Doctor Doom's Special 2 can actually reduce the damage to almost nothing very quickly. And also you can poison Doctor Doom, so it's a really good time there. So against a lot of top tier and annoying mystic characters, he actually works really well in my experience so far. So yeah, overall, he's just like a fun, solid character, fits well into a lot of teams and scenarios, and I see him having great uses in Act 7, Alliance Quest, maybe certain Alliance War scenarios moving forward, but ideally you do want that awakened ability to get additional poison at the start of the fight, and he does have a pretty nice benefit from suicide masteries due to the fact that he also heals based off the poisons that he has on him, if you do have the willpower mastery as well, and negates the what is it, healing poison reduction penalty there. So yeah, I think he's just a really well-made champion and a much better addition overall than Immortal Hulk. And again, I think this guy may have potential in the future depending on what he does get used for a solid god tier promotion. So yeah, going to be keeping a close eye on the Immortal version of Abomination. Then finally, we've got the buffed up version of Daredevil Netflix, now known as Daredevil Hell's Kitchen or Daredevil HK there. So this guy, let's go over the pros and cons because I'm still still a little bit disappointed. He's got some stuff he brings to the table, but also a big list of cons in my opinion. So the pros is he's a really good counter to Invisible Woman. The 3-star Daredevil gameplay that we did earlier today versus Invisible Woman, he's really good for that matchup. He also has some pretty decent damage after 2 special 2s or 1 special 3 and then 1 special 2, but again that does take a while to get into there. He also has an attack bonus for each non-damaging debuff on himself up to, I believe, 20. So if there's any node or scenario in the future that gives the character like so many non-damaging debuffs that don't really do anything, he's going to be really good for that. He also has some decent healing from willpower if you do not run the suicide masteries. He also, above 16 combo, has a fairly strong minus 65% ability accuracy reduction. So yeah, that can be very good for partially countering evade and dealing with all sorts of nodes and scenarios, but it only applies to defensive ability accuracy. Also, at Awakened Max Sig, he can counter Korg, Electro, and Magic, and any damage that would trigger when attacking into the opponent. But again, in order to get that piece of utility that Gambit actually has unawakened, it's exactly the same mechanic. You do need to have him fully max sig for it to be reliable there. So again, on a 5-star man, 200 sig stones is a very big investment. Now let's talk about the cons of Daredevil. So damage takes a while and multiple special attacks and heavy attacks to ramp up, and is comparatively underwhelming. The way I kind of think about ramping up this champion is actually very similar to the playstyle of Red Goblin. However, I feel like Red Goblin is kind of actually like borderline worth it once you get him ramped up. There's some really like spicy numbers, but again, it takes so long to get into. But Daredevil just doesn't have the numbers that Red Goblin has for pretty much a very similar rotation in much longer fights and scenarios. And I would say that Red Goblin is also a little bit less stressful and more practical to play in comparison. So yeah, playing those two characters very close to each other, I'm drawing a lot of comparisons in the playstyle between the two of them. On top of that, Daredevil has no ability to shrug off any debuffs which deal damage, and most of the time can't shrug off the non-damaging debuffs you want him to when you need him to. So you need to be like below a 16 combo in order to shrug off non-damaging debuffs. So like in a Void matchup, for example, it's just not really practical. This guy gets KO'd by Void so damn quickly because he's also applying his own non-damaging debuffs to himself, which are staying there. And then yeah, Void's passive just nukes him, man. So it's terrible matchup for Void there, at least in my experiences so far. He's also completely unplayable with the suicide masteries because he only has 40% base regeneration in comparison to 100%, because the fact that he applies his own non-damaging debuffs 100% apparently made him like too overpowered with the willpower mastery. So yeah, they made this guy completely unplayable with the suicide masteries, unfortunately. He also does have really strong benefits from synergies, the awakened ability, and max sig. He pretty much requires like almost everything a champion could require, but doesn't have like a big payoff or a really exciting result to show for it. He's kind of like Thor Ragnarok in terms of his requirements and everything you need for this character to be really good. Also, if the opponent is bleed or debuff immune, you do lose a fair bit of damage there. You also require being able to throw a heavy attack to manage your combo and also gain the cruelty buffs, which are very important. So in scenarios where you can't easily get off heavy attacks, again, that's going to impact the damage a fair bit. And also, you're very reliant on your opponent being aggressive and also you being able to throw special attacks as well, because if you can't get up to the special 2, special 3, then you're not going to have that bigger damage output. So that, yeah, there are a lot of nodes and scenarios that can just like cripple his gameplay. If there's debuff immune, if you've got something like draining your power, and also if you can't throw heavy attacks as well, there's just so many different scenarios and stressful endgame content that are going to weigh down a character that really isn't like, you know, pulling massive damage numbers in his best case scenario, and also doesn't really have like crazy utility that he brings to the table. He's got some alright utility, he's really good for certain matchups, but again, in comparison to better skill champions and better characters in general, at least in my opinion, this guy is just a bit of a disappointment. Like, he's definitely at the level where he's a playable character, but he's just not really that impressive in my opinion. But if you want to make this guy work for certain matches and scenarios, you know, he can work. But again, it's a lot of investment for a character that, at least in my opinion, just doesn't really have like that much of a payoff. Now, just to round off today's tier list update, I've also promoted Gambit to God tier. We did a 6-star rank 3 gameplay video and put on Suicide Masteries as well, and Suicide Masteries are so good for Gambit. This guy's been amazing for the Mutant Cavalier chapter in the monthly event quest as well, and if you use a power booster with Gambit, man, and just spam those special 2s, it's just broken. You can just go special 2, the fight is over. There is so much damage off them. So yeah, power boosters, man, crazy for Gambit, absolutely game-changing. With the Apocalypse Synergy and Suicide Masteries and Power Boosters, Gambit actually probably falls in the Beyond God tier. But yeah, I was just blown away by the 6-star rank 3 gameplay videos. So if you do want to see some sick stuff for Gambit, that is on the channel. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, hopefully you enjoyed the December tier list update, and if you did, please do smash that like button. That'd be greatly appreciated. But aside from that, thank you all very much for watching. Take care, and I hope that you have an absolutely fantastic day.